Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
This is something that hurts her so much, and it shouldn't happen again in Saudi Arabia.
Heartbreak from family members as a Saudi court sentences UBC grad and women's rights activist Lujain Al-Thul to nearly 6 years in prison.
And there's likely that there's possibly more across the United States and Canada and everywhere else around the world.
The implications for our province with a case of the new COVID-19 variant detected on Vancouver Island and more now cropping up across the country.
Nobody wants to beg. Leave the bathrooms open.
Cries that COVID has left them hopeless, leading to calls now for better access to public washrooms for people living with chronic illnesses.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Tanya Fletcher. Thanks for joining us tonight. Canada has passed a grim new milestone in the pandemic. As of today, more than 15,000 people in this country have died of COVID-19 related causes. And that troubling statistic comes as concern is growing about a new and more contagious form of the virus arriving from the UK. Canadian health officials have confirmed 4 cases now of the mutated virus in our country. One of them is here in BC. It's on Vancouver Island, and the other 3 cases are all in Ontario. There's one in Ottawa and 2 in the Durham region east of Toronto. All of the cases have been linked to travel from the UK. And that new UK variant has been detected in other countries as well, including Japan, South Korea, and several European nations. Like Canada, dozens of countries have banned flights now from the UK. Health authorities say there's now an even greater need for strict infection control measures. But so far, the new strain does not appear more deadly or vaccine resistant.
Obviously, if the virus becomes more contagious, that's not a good thing. But there's no evidence as of yet that the virus makes more people sick, that it causes more severe disease. And there's no evidence yet that it's going to invalidate all the vaccine work that has been done up until now.
And as we mentioned, Vancouver Island is one of the places in Canada where that new COVID variant has been detected. Our Corey Correa has more on what this means for British Columbians.
The person infected with the new coronavirus variant lives in the Island Health region. In a statement, the province says they flew from the UK to Vancouver on an Air Canada flight on December 15th. The traveler developed symptoms while in quarantine, with a positive diagnosis coming a few days later.
And there's likely that there's possibly more across the United States and Canada.
Dr. Srinivas says the challenge right now is identifying the strain and keeping up with the provincial health guidelines to limit contact.
It's early in the days of it being here in Canada, for example. We still have a great opportunity to quash it out and stop those chains of transmission so that it doesn't become the dominant strain here. But that opportunity is right now. And so making sure that we limit our transmissions as possible.
As Murthy says, it's early on with this new variant, and that has British Columbians concerned.
I figured if it comes, right? And hopefully they have a cure for it soon.
I'm not so worried about myself, but definitely worried about, my father's at a care home, so he's already had the vaccine, and hopefully that vaccine will work to cover this next, the offshoot.
Well, it's not even so much a new variant. Obviously, it's not getting much better, so it doesn't make sense to scale back on restrictions now.
The province says there is no evidence that the new COVID-19 variant is more likely to cause severe illness, nor is there any evidence to suggest the Health Canada approved vaccines will be any less effective against the new variant. For now, all flights from the UK are under a Canada-wide travel ban until January 6th.
That variant has become a dominant strain in that part of the region, and that's probably because it can transmit between individuals better than the original strain. It hasn't shown any differences in disease. It hasn't shown any differences in severity of illness or who it infects. It seems like it's more able to infect others.
Meanwhile, the province warns the virus spreads quickly, but shows up slowly.
I'm not worried. It's just about keep making myself safe, mask, washing my hands.
We should maintain more physical distance, and we should avoid social gatherings.
On top of taking safety precautions, British Columbians are also being asked to avoid non-essential travel, to to reduce the potential for a surge in new cases. Corey Correa, CBC News, Vancouver.
The BC Nurses Union is criticizing the rollout of COVID-19 vaccines in this province, accusing administrators of jumping the queue ahead of frontline workers. BCNU's president says unexplained delays and bureaucracy have hampered efforts to protect nurses. She said she's received reports of preferential treatment across all health districts, including claims that clinical pharmacists and general physicians are among those being immunized, yet they're not identifiably part of a priority group. BC's Ministry of Health says healthcare workers in long-term care homes and on the front lines of COVID-19 response in acute care are being prioritized. It also says some key outbreak response members were vaccinated, especially those helping to manage outbreaks at long-term care homes. The pandemic has meant most washrooms are closed to the public, even for paying customers at many businesses. And that's left an especially challenging situation for people living with chronic illnesses like Crohn's and colitis. They say COVID-related closures are leaving them in helpless situations. Our Zara Premji with CBC Vancouver's Impact team has that story.
Hopping in the car, on the way to just about anywhere.
I really have to beg to use a washroom.
Remo Testini has to stick to routine, searching for the nearest washrooms on his route, hoping a gas station or coffee shop will let him in.
My life revolves around going to the washroom.
The 54-year-old has been living with Crohn's disease for 14 years now, an inflammatory bowel disease that can lead to patients needing the washroom often and urgently.
It's not like you can control it. You don't know when it's going to happen. It can happen at any time. You could be standing in a lineup, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I gotta go.
And because of this, mapping his path on this app by Crohn's and Colitis Canada, searching for the nearest washroom, has had to become the new normal.
I find out where the closest bathroom is before I go to work, and yeah, you have to do that. You can't get stuck.
But now add a pandemic into the mix and finding one is becoming next to impossible for Testini. And he says as he's turned away more, he's left with no safe option.
Well, you don't make it. Don't make it, then I gotta drive home and get changed. Nobody wants to use a public bathroom unless they absolutely have to. So if I'm asking them, pleading to use a washroom, it's not because of anything else except that I gotta go.
And this fear of being turned away from more washrooms during COVID-19 isn't his fear alone. Crohn's and Colitis Canada says at least 33,000 British Columbians live with a chronic illness like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's, and 1 in every 140 people in the country.
They're using the washroom 5 to 20 times a day or more, and they may not be able to hold it, so there could be a potential for an accident.
He adds the key problem is it's an invisible chronic disease. No one sees it when they see you. Dr. Barinder Narang says no provincial health order and no medical guidance has asked for washrooms to be locked up.
COVID transmission is still droplet-based with cleaning and regular cleaning and limiting the number of people that go in and access these facilities. It hasn't been identified as an identifiable source.
The Ministry of Health says a public restroom is actually deemed essential, but when it comes to coffee shops and gas stations,
we do encourage people to make it available to those in need in a safe way.
Now, people living with Crohn's and ulcerative colitis say they hope more businesses will sign up for the Go Here app and place a sticker on their door allowing people to use their washrooms. But for those businesses not signed up on the app or those denying access to people like Testini, he has just one message.
Nobody wants to beg. Leave the bathrooms open.
Zara Premji, CBC News, Vancouver.
RCMP are investigating a shooting in Surrey. It happened yesterday and the victim later died in the hospital. 19-year-old Harpreet Singh Desi was found inside his vehicle with gunshot wounds near 137 A Street and 90th Avenue around 10:30 last night. Desi was known to police and his death is believed to be targeted. Anyone with information is asked to call IHIT or Crime Stoppers. In international news now, while Beijing initially failed to contain COVID-19, its campaign to contain independent accounts of the virus has been relentless. And as our Farah Morelli shows us, today it sent a citizen journalist to prison for reporting what the world now knows all too well.
Police form a line to keep journalists back outside a court in Shanghai, where Zhang Jian was sentenced today. This supporter says, I came here to try and see her. I went there just now, but staff told me it's not allowed. The citizen journalist was given 4 years in prison for what Chinese authorities called picking quarrels and provoking trouble. Starting in February, Jan gave the world some of the first images of what would become a global pandemic, which often painted a different picture than the one Beijing presented. She wasn't alone. Others like Fang Bin, Chen Chudsa, and Li Zuoha all documented the unfolding chaos. All disappeared or were detained at some point. Jen is believed to be the first sentenced, but some worry she won't be the last.
I think it just goes on to show that how intolerant the Chinese government is towards any narrative that is against that of its own. Anyone who's trying to challenge the Chinese authorities' official narrative of COVID-19.
There have been continuing questions about the Chinese government's transparency at the start of the pandemic.
Our team is on the ground in China as we speak.
Even criticism of the WHO's willingness to take Chinese officials at their word. Speaking to the CBC today, Canadian Bruce Elward, a senior WHO advisor, defended the response.
You saw the people and they were calling them the spacesuits, etc. The warning was there for the entire world that this was something very dangerous. They were locking down an entire city. This was back in January.
The WHO will need Chinese cooperation next month when its team arrives in Wuhan to investigate the origins of the virus. As for Jan's fate, her lawyer said today she's being persecuted for exercising her freedom of speech and plans to appeal. Farah Morali, CBC News, London.
Still ahead, with flights from the UK still banned, Canadians overseas are stuck for the time being. We'll look at the options they're facing while trying to come home next. And thanks for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. Well, from streaming to online shopping, the pandemic has brought momentum to many business ventures this year, including for virtual influencers. The CBC's Thomas Dagla explains.
This smartphone ad sure blurs the line between reality and fantasy. Look closely. That's Michaela. Of all the celebrities in the ad, she's the only one who's virtual, as in computer-generated, but still real enough to rack up millions of social media followers.
I'm going to tell you a story that's super embarrassing.
Appearing relatable.
Going through a breakup obviously sucks.
She's also got this tongue-in-cheek sense of humor about her that people I personally found so enjoyable to follow and read about.
Welcome to the world of virtual influencers. Online celebrities who are less restricted than any human, especially now.
With a lot of the regular entertainment world shut down, it's been a good time for them. They're not going to give anyone COVID-19.
Paul Budnitz founded the company behind this guy, Googimon, a decidedly darker character whose story says he's from Montreal, hence the maple leaf on his chest. At this lifestyle store in Toronto, Googimon merchandise frequently sells out, and fast.
All over Canada, people have been checking it out. We've done parties in here where we've had Googimon. We've been partying. We've done release parties where we've had DJs, music. Maybe the future's headed that direction.
Digital artist Ruby saw the trend coming, took her own online persona, and made it virtual.
Some of us are not as authentic. The creator behind a virtual character might not be relatable or connected with the character.
Take Shudu, a self-described digital supermodel portrayed as a black woman but created by a white man. Some consider that cultural appropriation. Other virtual influencers promote Black Lives Matter without facing the backlash endured by real people. Call it a digital double standard.
It's not as clear as this is a good trend or a scary trend. There's a lot of gray area here.
Between real and fake, there's a lot of gray area indeed, and likely more to come. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, Toronto.
And we'll be back in just a few moments with more news from across the country and right around the world. Stay with us. Welcome back. Well, the COVID-19 variant isn't just a concern here. Its dramatic spread across the UK poses challenges for Canadians trying to get home from that country. And as Sarah Levitt explains, it's raising questions about whether they should.
It's really just been a chaotic time.
Stuck in London, Faith Thompson has spent 5 days trying to figure out how to get to Bracebridge, Ontario. After Ottawa banned all travel from the UK earlier this month, getting answers on how to get home hasn't been easy.
The consulate is saying, please contact your airlines, for the most up-to-date information. But then when you contact the airlines, they're so apprehensive of saying anything incorrect or telling you anything that they're defaulting you back to the embassies.
Global Affairs Canada has discouraged non-essential travel since March. We are aware of Canadians abroad seeking to return to Canada following recent developments in the United Kingdom. There are no plans to offer repatriation or assisted departure flights. It's left many figuring out other ways to get home.
I'm currently booked for a flight on Wednesday, so in 2 days from now, and that flight's going to Amsterdam. And then going with Air Canada from Amsterdam to Frankfurt, Frankfurt to Montreal, Montreal to Toronto.
It also raises questions about spreading the virus.
When you have large number of people coming, and because so many people can be asymptomatic with this virus, there'll be a fraction that don't behave themselves and don't isolate when they come.
Brianne Kelsick and her boyfriend came home from London for family Christmas 12 days ago and have quarantined ever since. They say they've followed the rules but haven't heard from health officials until yesterday.
We had an officer come to the door, we didn't have any phone calls or anything, and he just asked to see both of us.
They have a flight back on January 3rd but expect it to be cancelled.
Maybe we get a little bit longer vacation here, which for us wouldn't be the worst thing.
Not the case for those scrambling to get back from the UK. The ban is in effect until January 6th and could likely be extended. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, stateside, the long wait for additional financial pandemic aid is over. Last night, U.S. President Donald Trump signed a massive bill which included a $900 billion COVID-19 relief package. It will put much-needed cash into the pockets of millions of people come January. But as Derek Stoffel reports, the new year is also expected to bring many, many more COVID cases to that country.
There are a number of statistics that tell the tragic story of COVID-19 here in the United States. This one perhaps the most telling. More than 63,000 Americans have died so far this month from COVID-19, making December the deadliest since the pandemic began. And medical officials are once again warning of a new spike in cases tied to holiday travel. Yesterday, about 1.3 million Americans went through security screening at U.S. airports, the busiest day during COVID times by far. And with all that travel, more cases, more deaths are expected. And even before that happens, the situation in many places is dire.
We have a viral tsunami on our hands here in California and Los Angeles. And I think we have really amplifying events that have occurred with the back-to-back holiday seasons. We've had Halloween, followed by Thanksgiving, followed by now Hanukkah and Christmas, and soon to be New Year's Eve.
When you take a close look at the COVID case numbers in the U.S. from last week, cases and deaths actually fell 15%, but researchers say that's likely because of reporting gaps over the holidays. And officials are once again urging people to keep using masks and social distance, even as the rollout of the 2 vaccines continues across the United States. Derek Stoffel, CBC News, Washington.
There was global outrage today over the sentencing of a Saudi woman. Loujain El Hathloul is a prominent women's rights activist who also happens to be a graduate of the University of British Columbia. She became known around the world for defying the kingdom's ban on women driving. So she pushed for change and wound up in jail. As Greg Rasmussen reports, she was sentenced today to 6 years in prison under a counter-terrorism law.
The offense that started it all, driving while being a woman, made Loujain El Hathloul famous and drew the ire of the Saudi government. Now sentenced to nearly 6 years in prison after a trial in a special terrorism court on charges including agitating for change and using the internet to harm public order.
She's very strong. She has a very strong character.
Alia Al-Hathlul believes her sister will not stop speaking out and is demanding action on claims she was tortured in custody.
She wants to make sure that there's a real investigation and not just a cover-up investigation, a real investigation about the torture, because this is something that hurts her so much.
The conviction comes even after Saudi Arabia lifted the law banning women from driving more than 2 years ago. The United Nations and civil rights groups have loudly criticized the country for widespread human rights violations.
It's not just women's rights activists, it's academics, it is journalists, it is all forms of activists advocating on a range of issues are being silenced.
Global Affairs Canada said the conviction and sentence are deeply troubling, and we understand that early release is possible and advocate for it. The Saudi court suggested Al-Hathlul could be released within months after spending more than 2 years in jail awaiting trial.
I think Canada can and should be much more vocal.
Al-Hathlul studied for 4 years in Vancouver, and friends here are worried but inspired.
She has never compromised her integrity. She has never compromised her morals. She has always courageously stood for what's right, even when she's faced grave consequences as a result.
Some analysts suggest this move is an attempt by the Saudis to distance themselves from this high-profile case as the Biden administration arrives with its promise of action on human rights. Greg Rasmussen, CBC News, Vancouver.
And at 6:21, you're looking at a live shot of the Georgia Viaduct and over at Science World there. Well, it was an overcast but relatively dry Christmas. So will the rain return for New Year's? We'll find out with the 5-day forecast on the way next.
Finally, there's an exhibition in Vancouver called The Look of Music. It's a display of rare musical instruments, a delight for the eye rather than the ear. Colin Hoth reports.
The Look of Music exhibition offers a chance to hear some early music, but its purpose is really to let you see the great-great-grandfather of the rock group's electric guitar and the forebears of the jazzman's horn. It's an exhibition that's been specifically designed to appeal to an international audience.
Welcome to The Look of Music. This audio der verschiedenen Musikinstrumente, besonders den der weniger bekannten in
It is the first time that such a collection of instruments has ever been brought together. Among the 300 items are historical displays like the 18th century European music room, which features the ebony flute that was played by Frederick the Great. And then there's the very first clarinet that was ever made. But there are curiosities as well, the once fashionable hurdy-gurdy that's now all but disappeared, and this 7-belled cornet, which actually worked quite well, but simply turned out to be too heavy for the musicians to hold. The staging of this show has cost twice as much as the King Tut exhibit. Not least of the cost was the transportation for these delicate instruments, 3/4 of which had never been allowed to travel before.
Some of them travelled first class, sitting next to the courier in its own seat with its own safety belt. Some of them travelled by freight, some of them travelled by truck, some of them by plane, and some of them by car.
The exhibition expects to attract 50,000 visitors by the time it closes in April. Colin Hoth, CBC News, Vancouver.
And that's the National for Thursday, December 25th. I'm Knowlton Nash. Good night, and I hope you've had a Merry Christmas.
The Market Report is brought to you by Fortis BC. We've got even bigger rebates.
Rebate.
Whoa! On select high-efficiency equipment for business, but only for a limited time.
The North Atlantic right whale is among the most endangered of their species, with precisely 356 of them left. As Brett Ruskin reports, Transport Canada is now looking for a new way to spot and track them.
Transport Canada has mapped out the Gulf of St. Lawrence in an effort to keep humans and whales apart. And to locate those whales, this is one of their tools. It was a trial project using a fixed-wing drone from the University of Alaska. According to documents posted online this month, now the government wants a permanent solution. And the new drone would have the same impressive capabilities as the American one, but would also be able to take off vertically without a runway. Adrian Fish teaches drone photography at NASCA University in Halifax. He says fixed-wing aircraft often rely on airport infrastructure.
That limits where a craft can take off and land, whereas a vertical takeoff and landing craft really is not limited by those same factors.
It also means the drone could take off from boats anywhere in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. But just how hard is it to find whales in the Gulf?
Imagine if the Gulf of St. Lawrence were shrunk down to the size of this football field. How big would a North Atlantic right whale be? Well, if all of the North Atlantic right whales, all 356 or so of them, lined up one after another in a line in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, on this field it would only be 0.3 millimeters. That's like an ultra fine marker tip. So, something even so large as a whale is nearly impossible to find in some place so vast as the Gulf of St. Lawrence.
That's why Transport Canada wants this drone to be able to fly for up to 6 hours and at more than 5,000 feet.
So a typical off-the-shelf product will give you about 7 kilometers of distance, which is actually tremendous.
But 7 kilometers isn't enough, says Transport Canada. They want 140 kilometers of range from their new drone, all in an effort to cover as much area and save as many whales as possible. Brett Ruskin, CBC News, Halifax.
And saving the best for last, let's bring in our meteorologist Nick Czernkovich now with the forecast. And Nick, we got through a relatively dry but overcast Christmas. What's the outlook for New Year's looking like so far?
Well, you know, at this point, it's actually looking like we've got more in the way of rainfall headed to the west coast. There's a series of systems that are going to move through. A little bit of a break tomorrow and then more in the way of rain. Let me time it out for you. This is the next storm system that we're looking at. So just a little bit of cloud cover right now. Should be generally clear through the overnight. Expecting to see some fog patches developing again through the overnight. As we head through tomorrow evening, that's when we're looking at rain showers approaching the coast, and those are basically going to continue as we head through most of Wednesday and then break up a little bit through Thursday and then into Friday or New Year's. We've got more in the way of rain showers headed our way once again. How much can you expect with this first wave? Well, it looks like as we head through Wednesday morning about 30 millimeters and add maybe about another 20 by the time we hit Wednesday evening. So all told about 30 to 50 millimeters. Forecast for tomorrow looks like this across parts of British Columbia. There are temperatures more or less around the seasonal mark. We zoom in a little bit closer. Showers late day as you hit the lower mainland, but otherwise as you move out toward Vancouver Island, we're looking at rainfall earlier in the day. There is a look at your next 5 days. Temperatures at 4 degrees, just a hair below seasonal. 6 on Wednesday with that rainfall, bit of a break on Thursday, and then more in the way of rainfall as we head toward New Year's.
All right, thanks so much, Nick. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. And you can always find our news program online at cbc.ca/BC. Our next local TV news is right here tomorrow at 6 p.m. Have a great night. Thanks for joining us.